Chapter 31, Only in an Arithmetical Ratio. Hell Arc. Only in an arithmetical ratio. A door opened onto a dark space. A switch flipped. For 5 seconds nothing happened. Then something sparked and yellow light plus dull buzz made real a sofa, a television, drawn curtains, a mound of clothes, a kitchen refrigerator and sink, an ominous hallway and a few doors at the end of it.
Power's on at least, MMNH.
3 Voyagers labored pendulously inside, one after another they collapsed. Against the kitchen counter, upon the sofa. The lights flickered. The witch remembered Hemmett's songs, When the Power's Out, in the Heart of Man. Those songs were about this corner of the world, after all.
Ta! Filthy, the miasma has coated me in soot, what about you two?
Face down against the sofa cushion, her body unraveling onto the carpet, the Nazi murmured, "Food."
If the power's on, perhaps we'll have hot water too, a shower. Food. Food.
The Baroness lifted her head from the fridge, leaving a dirty black mark.
Well. I need anything. Anything. Désolé ma petite Amy, I'm afraid our larders have run low. No. No. You said you would go to the store today. That's what you said, I heard it.
The Nazi twisted her face to entreat the witch for affirmation.
Didn't she say it? Didn't she? Ah, but I did mention, I do believe, the shelves were more or less bare. Anything. I'll eat fucking anything. I'll eat fucking you if you're not fucking careful. Now, my protégé, that swearing, certainly excessive. Oh shut up. Take your freaking hot shower. Fuck, I'm so hungry.
The Nazi gripped her stomach and, in a gesture either of total desperation or total melodrama, gnawed the couch cushion. The lights flickered and went out. The conversation quieted and in the dwindling effervescence they turned their faces together toward the bulb. A pack of wild dogs woofed on the street below, or they might have been something else. The witch became aware of her continuous heaving breath. A strand of electricity cracked between 2 filaments and the bulb resuscitated. The constant hum resumed and the hounds below skittered slipping across the ice until they woofed into a different alley.
I do believe, shall take that shower before the opportunity eludes me.
The Baroness slid across the walls and disappeared into the dark.
Have fun,
the Nazi whispered once the frozen pipes up and down their tenement squealed. She and the witch used in the living room for several minutes before the voice of the Baroness cried.
Ah! It's warm. Slightly brown, but warm, come, let us not waste this chance.
Her head poked from the doorway at the end of the hall.
HMMMMMM? A good hot bath will do you both good.
Warming up would only make a deeper bite when cold returned. The best defense was to freeze. At a certain temperature your corpse body could not longer distinguish thermometer extremes. They merged into a single feeling, hot, cold. The Nazi betrayed no enthusiasm at the prospect either. After the Baroness harumphed into the bathroom, she checked her wrist as though she had a watch and lolled her head toward the witch.
What's the time? I don't know. Close to midnight, right? Right.
A flash of the Nazi's old grin. She crawled up the sofa to an end table where she seized a remote. She mashed the buttons until the television they stole from the vacated room next door defrosted and unfocused blobs of color fritzed across the screen. The sound came before the image, a low, funereal soundtrack muted as though heard only through several layers of wall. The disconnected blobs converged into an empty podium in front of a blank black surface.
"I thought you said you wouldn't watch that show anymore,"
said the witch.
"Anything, so I don't have to think about how hungry I am."
The Nazi shambled into a seated position and leaned over her knees to rub her hands together. Nonetheless her stomach squelched and the vigor in her face contorted as she gripped her middle. The witch, finally beginning to recover from the night's hunt, hoisted herself onto the sofa too, while the Baroness's screechy singing voice pierced the walls, coincidentally in tune to the death march music from the TV. The witch hated this show. She did not understand it, but she hated it. Nonetheless, she could never help but watch whenever it came on, which happened every day at noon and midnight. It always showed the same podium with the same black background. If you started watching early enough, before the camera zoomed in, you would see that in front of the podium, seated in several rows of chairs, were men and women well dressed, heads bowed, some with laptops, others with devices. A solitary American flag hung to the side and a pair of pillars framed the outskirts of the room. The floor was the same black as the wall, and a sign hung from the podium that read, "The White House, Washington." The show always started the same way, timed to perfection, and even without a functional clock the witch had watched the program enough to time the opening act to the music. Thus, she held a hand over her eyes when the press secretary sprouted from behind the podium to fling her hands out and cock her head and beam at her audience with the same hideous face she always wore. The first time the witch watched the show, this action had no effect on her. In fact, she laughed at its silliness juxtaposed against the pomp and circumstance of the venue, but as the newest episode of the show came out every 12 hours and each began the same way, she slowly developed a reaction. She stopped wanting to see the press secretary emerge. Something about the way her face looked sat poorly in her stomach, and the way her hands moved, and it was only when one night she had a dream in which she stared at that empty podium, stared and stared and stared at it, and woke with a start with the press secretary emerged not behind the podium but in front of it, that the witch started to cover her face when it happened in real life. The Nazi, she noticed, also closed her eyes during this part. The press secretary never made a sound when she emerged, so only when she began to speak did they know they could look again.
"Hi, everyone tilde. Hi, Madam Press Secretary,"
the witch and the Nazi said together. They looked. The press secretary clutched her podium and leaned toward the camera smiling and happy. It had somehow taken 10 or 20 episodes for the witch to recognize her as Centurion Joliet from the Chicago Empire. Her distinctive face had not changed, and the wriggling cat ears and tail were no excuse for forgetting. She had carried Joliet on her broomstick, after all. Away from that lake. Joliet had sobbed the entire time, first from fear, second for being a coward. She kept mumbling, "I should die, I should die." Now she said,
"I love you all so much, Maya. Maya, Maya."
She batted her hands like paws.
"Another way hiskerful night here in Poshington, but other places aren't so lucky ducky, meow meow tilde."
"Ahaha, fuck you bitch." The Nazi made a rude gesture at the television.
"Before we begin our press briefing, let's give a round of applause for all the good work our new president's been doing, meow meow tilde. Yay, President."
She clapped, and although the Nazi continued to spout obscenities, she and the witch clapped too.
"Another, really busy day. We're all so sad about the tragedy in Miami. Really sad."
She balled her paw hands under her eyes to mimic tears, although she maintained her sheepish grin.
"Maya. Fortunately you're super lucky ducket that President DuPage is here to fix everything, meow meow tilde.
She winked and stuck out her tongue. She could not be more hideous. Her appearance sickened, and her jerky prancing motions to either side of the podium, almost a choreographed dance, heightened the disdain.
I'd eat you too, cat bitch, ah ha.
The Nazi bounced on her cushion.
Roast you on a spit, ah ha. Turn you over a flame. The President has put the biggest and bestest ESD minds on the case, meow meow tilde. We've uncovered lots and lots of great information, meow meow tilde. In fact, we can confirm that the reports of scary spooky monsters showing up in cities, well, I've gone and lost my train of thought. Stupid me tilde, I'm such a dummy, aren't I? Meow meow tilde. Cook her, suck out her brains. Ah ha.
The witch, despite certain misgivings, also would not mind seeing the press secretary diced into mincemeat. Everything about her stirred resentment. At first the witch thought it had to do with an ingrained hatred of the American political machine, its fascistic defense of a capitalistic system that stomped on the livelihoods of the many to the benefit of a few. But there was something visceral, personal about what she felt toward the press secretary. It lit a fire inside her she long feared frozen, and she understood the Nazis' magnetism toward watching. As long as she hated, as long as she despised, she had a reason to keep watching, to keep surviving each day, to despise some more the next night, and in a way her hate became a twisted form of hope.
Anywho tilde, time to answer questions from the press, meow meow tilde. How about, how about you first, meow Sterling?
A sallow pressman stood.
Does President DuPage have a comment on Governor Brown's threats to secede the state of California? You bet. You bet, meow meow tilde. After all, our president is committed to maintaining our union and keeping our country strong and fwesh. So here's what she had to say. She said, quote, Governor Brown can come and fight me one-on-one. Do it, bitch. Wowza tilde. Our president sure has a fiery disposition, meow meow tilde.
Another reporter stood.
Reports indicate that Public Enemy 1 Valerie Jefferson was sighted in Chicago. Do you plan to mobilize the armed forces to capture her? Oh no. Miss Snifferson is much too strong for our military, bless their hearts. However, the president's offer stands, a replacement for the Poshington Monument to whoever brings her head. Maya tilde.
Another reporter.
These so-called monsters, or demons, or wraiths, as they're called, is there any connection between them and the reports of young women fighting with magic?
Yoof. The press secretary tripped and fell. She upended entirely, so that her head struck the ground and her legs twisted in the air. The podium wobbled. Everyone could see her panties. Another reporter stood.
Madam Press Secretary, what is the President's comment on the reported Chinese-Japanese alliance? Oh that.
The press secretary stood.
Our frisky President prepared a statement for that too tilde. Look at that,
said the Nazi.
Who is she trying to trick? Ah ha. It's so blatant. I can't stand it. Who voted for these clowns? Where's the black guy? Bring back the black guy.
The witch didn't understand that part either. Nobody really did. Sometime in January the president just became President DuPage. The Nazi, a born and bred Canadian, might be forgiven for thinking an election happened, but the witch had spent too much time declaiming the American government not to understand it. Something had gone wrong. She knew it had to do with the Chicago Empire, but she knew not why or what. The reporters flocked to Washington when it happened and returned with lukewarm optimism.
New President DuPage promises peace and prosperity.
Every mainstream rag, for the first time ever, approached the situation with the same bias. Nobody seemed to treat the transition as abnormal. Nobody seemed to mind that the new president was a 25-year-old Canadian. The military, the Senate, the judiciary, nobody acted out of line, and at first the world continued as it always had. Other nations, baffled, sent envoys, and the envoys returned with the same ambiguity as the journalists. Nobody understood anything. Somebody screamed. Several reporters scurried aside as a man with a flapping tie surged forward, raised a gun, and fired 3 or 4 times into the press secretary's body. This was also a daily occurrence. The Nazi stood and cheered as the press secretary bounced against the black wall and left her blood running down it in a smear. The disgruntled gunman leapt onto the platform, his hand was shaking, he aimed for the gem. Enough rumors had cropped up online that they began to aim for the gem, but they invariably missed. The press secretary hemmed up her wounds, swooning against the wall, blurting blood. His hand shook, she glanced at him with her unwell smile, the bullet missed her completely. The camera made it hard to tell, but it looked as though he jerked his hand aside at the last moment.
Oh no, what for shall I do, Tilda?
Then she made a horrid retching noise. Her eyes went blank and wide and her body convulsed. Her mouth hung open, massive and dark, and her head rolled back. An arm shot out of it, followed by a second. They reached and gripped the sides of the press secretary's head for support as an entire body began to emerge. The online theorists mimically referred to this figure as Schrödinger, because she only appeared once the cat was half dead. Those less hip with the lingo sometimes referred to the press secretary herself as Schrödinger, only to get heckled into oblivion. Schrödinger, who the witch knew as Clown Muffle, tipped her top hat, drew a curtain from its depths, and whipped it over the assassin. In an instant no assassin remained. The audience of reporters stood and applauded, and Schrödinger bestowed them with a theatrical bow and a jaunty bounce on her heels.
Yeah. Yeah. Ha.
It became unclear whether the Nazi clapped and laughed for the assassin or Schrödinger or both. Either way, she never seemed to recognize Schrödinger as the decaying, vomiting corpse she encountered one New Year's night in Riverside, Ottawa. Had not the witch known her before her injury, when she wore the same white top hat and tuxedo, she might not have recognized her either. Operatics concluded, Schrödinger attended her bloodied kitten, who held a hand skyward and babbled some dying Egypt dying nonsense without losing her gurgly smile. One whip of the curtain and the press secretary's wounds were restored. Schrödinger gave a final bow, waved away shouts of encore, and climbed back into the press secretary's mouth, slamming it shut behind her as she disappeared. The cat tightened her floppy bowtie, smoothed her skirt, and stepped back to the podium.
Ahem. KKH.
She rubbed her throat, turned and spat, then licked the back of her hand with a long tongue.
Akhem. As for the grim tidings in Detroit, our snuggleable president issued apologies but added, if they wanted to live, they shouldn't have hanged themselves. What? I said.
The Baroness, swathed in steam, tromped across the hall. Her loose bathrobe flowed around her as she stormed to the television, held a hand over her eyes, and fumbled for the switch, which she pressed before the Nazi had a chance to realize what she was doing.
I said, no more of that ugly program, you promised me. Hey! I was watching.
The Nazi fumbled with the remote but her numb fingers dropped it instead. She shot a glare at the Baroness.
You can't tell me what I can and can't watch. You know that program never helps anything. You never help anything. You fat cow. Where's the food? Where's the food? All I asked for was food, you say yeah I'll get you the food, where is it? No food. No food. This has nothing to do with the food. It sure does. It sure does. It's the least you could do, you lazy useless cow. Cow. You stand around when we fight, you don't pull your weight, I'm the one who does all the work, the least you could do was find food, but you can't even do that, do I have to do that too? I am a support unit, know you know tactics? Support, I heal, I increase your vitality, vim, vigor, without my aid you would never even peel yourself off the couch, my protégé. Shut up. Shut up, shut up, I can't stand your stupid way of talking, it's not cute anymore. Oh? What would you have me do, abandon everything that makes me? Turn myself into a sulking argumentative little buffoon like you, mademoiselle?
The witch, meanwhile, stared at the dead screen with the afterimage of the press secretary burned into her eyeballs. The air became dense, the steam filled it from the bathroom, her chest tightened and her eyes watered. The pair's screams bounced back and forth. Her ears throbbed, she clamped her hands to them. Once they started, they would not stop for hours. It would intensify its pitch until she wished death to them both. Especially so late. The program turned off, she suddenly wanted nothing more than sleep, but this racket could overcome even her tremendous fatigue. Plus she hated their voices. She snuck outside, the pair too engrossed in their world to notice or care. It would be dangerous to go downstairs alone, so she opened the window at the end of the corridor and stepped outside. She landed on her broomstick and lifted herself higher and higher, the air purifying with altitude until she could close her eyes and breathe deeply and decompress her lungs. Despite everything, they had raked a good haul that night, so she did not fear the waste of magic. She required these quiet, lonely moments to maintain sanity. Ottawa had become black. Few lights shone, their apartment one of them, several isolated rooms scattered across its skyline, a few flickers in the corners. The streets, nonetheless, seethed, although the things that seethed did not qualify as human or living. She took care not to rise too high, because at a certain distance from civilization the coldness ebbed away, and if it did she could never force herself back down. She only needed to manage an elevation above the rooftops to stay protected from the threats below. She flitted to the places where Wi-Fi sometimes worked, but tonight they did not work, so she could not check the latest comments from communities, both magical and non-concerning the press secretary's briefing. So she reclined against the broomstick and watched the stars as she coasted along the cityscape. What happened? How did Clown Muffle wind up there? She told herself not to care. Even if the world collapsed around her, her life was better with Clown Muffle outside it. She had thought, at first, good. Let the fools in Washington run amok. Burn down this world. Unjust, unfair, built on the back of centuries of enslavement and repression. The revolutionary mindset. Tear everything down to build something new. A revolution was like lancing a boil, you had to split the skin to drain the pus. She didn't know. Now she wanted not to care. It overwhelmed her too much if she tried. It had overwhelmed almost everyone. Ottawa had emptied of magical girls. On her radar, besides her and the Nazi and the Baroness, and they persisted solely due to unity, only a single blip remained, Gatineau. She had not spoken to Gatineau after that night. But every time Clown Muffle appeared on the camera she wondered the same thing, that whatever Gatineau did to her in that pit led to her new home in the Cat's Maw. She had never liked Clown Muffle, hated her to the point of obsession, but that hate had, perhaps mostly, stemmed from Clown Muffle's absurd sense of dignity. Now even that was gone. Gatineau had not moved for 3 days. Her radar blip lingered in the exact same spot, her underground chamber. The lair into which she lured Clown Muffle. In the past months it had become common for her to spend extended stretches there, but this period had stretched abnormally long. Clown Muffle never needed her. Of course. Anyone could have known that. But in that cold land, in that overturned truck, she had deluded herself. In that white dead forest, she had tossed away a large part of herself to help her. Just as she had changed herself for Hemet, become what Hemet wanted her to be, she tore down that construction to be what Clown Muffle wanted instead. It had been so easy, in the end, to cast aside her indignation, her need for revenge, her philosophical standpoints. It had been, either cast them aside or break. She took the path of least resistance. She was weak. She flew toward Gatineau's blip. She had a question. The area around the entrance to the lair, a dense agglomeration of poverty, of course seethed with wraiths. But the witch had better learned how to use her powers in the months since coming to Ottawa. Speed was key, no matter how many you killed, more always replaced them. She dive-bombed the alley where Gatineau showed them the entrance. The wraiths turned their distorted face toward her as though they expected her, but they were only lesser wraiths, so she blasted them with several ribbons of magic and slammed against the unlocked cellar door. It split open, more wraiths shambled, but she already knew the spell to use against the wall of solid rock with which Gatineau sealed the entrance.
Defodio,
she said, and a force issued from her wand strong enough to tunnel through. She sped into the dark. Her radar operated in 3 dimensions, she had a decent idea how deep she needed to plunge before she reached the bottom. Led only by a spark of light at the end of her wand, she descended. Wraiths shambled down here, too. She had not consciously expected them, and to an extent she regretted her decision to plunge. As she reached the bottom and the sheer stone floor rose to greet her, she waved her lit wand and cast flames upon the shadowy figures. There were not many, at least not like on the streets, between the buildings, in the homes. Gatineau. Gatineau, I've come. No response. She sped to the wall Gatineau had opened for them when they first visited, beyond which Gatineau waited. Gatineau. Why she descended she no longer knew, a whim or flight of fancy, perhaps it was yet again taking the path of least resistance, because at a certain point something always gave and the life you led became untenable and you needed to do anything new, pursue any curiosity, rekindle any flame. She pounded her fist against the stone, but it was stone and it hurt. Gatineau, I want to talk about Clown Muffle. About the girl you brought down here. She had been foolish to risk so much for this. The Baroness and the Nazi needed her. She wasn't as useful as the former or as strong as the latter, but without her they might not last much longer. Not that she had a logical reason to feel desperate yet. But something about the air down here enclosed her, elevated her anxiety. Claustrophobia. Or agoraphobia. The darkness made it unclear which. It should have been neither, she was as accustomed to cramped hovels as open skyboxes. She zapped a wraith clustering close. A subterranean rumble unbalanced her. She shoved her broomstick against the ground to steady herself as silt and small stones rained from an unseen above. The sheer stone wall began to part down the middle, a golden light burst through. It blinded her and she reeled back, hands against her face. The light seemed to sear her skin, but her skin did not change. The light seared the creeping things at her back and they squealed and burst. A crucifix. A gigantic crucifix made of gold. Lined with inset diamonds. Whatever had once been inside this room had become it. A charred black form trembled upon it, arms splayed, body hanging. In a line on either side of it hung several others, from nooses.
Gatineau,
said the witch, entering, hand palm outward upon her forehead. The walls were a mosaic. Penitent scenes played upon them, in opal, in emerald, in rhinestone.
Gatineau! What have you done in here?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 bodies hanging. The 13th, upon the cross, lifted its head.
Art, fille. One final expression, c'est magnifique, ways. You killed them. No. No. Non. You are the same idiot as before. I would never. Death, it's useless. No. I have any other materials to use, I would use them. This is my final expression, it's because there's nothing left but death.
The witch said nothing.
They killed themselves. All of them. I knew nothing, I sensed nothing, yes? I believed the filth above could never drain down here, but I was the idiot now. Ironic, yes.
2 mineral spikes burst from the ground. At first the witch thought they sprung to pierce the body on the cross stigmata style, but they stopped just before its face. On one was stabbed a cigarette and the other scraped for a spark to light it. A whirl of mouth opened and clamped the cigarette between its teeth and the tendrils retreated into the ground.
So they found all this convenient rope down here. Idiot! Look! Look!
The witch looked. Truthfully, she had not observed the hanging corpses in much detail, she lacked the desire. But a slightly more detailed examination revealed a caved portion of forehead on each.
They dashed their heads against my stones until they died. They hated it so much. They were in so much pain. And I was unaware of their pain, I who believed to know them so intimately.
Although she spoke rapidly and with unbroken fluidity, the cigarette did not fall from her lower jaw, and a veil of smoke occluded her. This vain creature probably only let her in as witness to this final work of art, whatever she believed it signified. The witch lost hope she might learn anything about Clown Muffle, and her indecisive mind tilted toward the "you don't want to know anything about Clown Muffle" side of the spectrum. This was the sort of silly whim someone stressed out of their mind would take, nothing more. She supposed it provided an iota of closure when the blip on her radar inevitably died. Not that she cared, not that she cared.
Yes, I think I could have protected this place. Not difficult? I could always separate it from the world above. So easy, so simple. Bah! The layers of this world are thick. Human misery means so little to it. What happens above should never matter down here, I don't know,
said the witch. She looked for a way out. If she bolted, the stone doors might seal before she had a chance to escape. She did not detect magicidal intent in Gatineau's rambling, but one could never say for sure. The next words stopped these formative plans.
EET was your friend, you know, Clown Muffle. That name, that stupid name, I can only hear it, I can only hear her. What did she do to me, what did she do? What did she do?
Asked the witch.
Nothing. She did nothing. I do not understand. Fille. She was exactly as I wanted her, exactly what I needed her to be. But it did not work, non? Somehow. I did not take what I wanted from her. She took it instead from me. I do not understand what she did.
Her will. Fate and everything twisted to her will. She chewed what she wanted, swallowed what she liked, spat out everything that displeased her. Any connection she forged with another human being was to increase her consumption. The witch glimpsed her heart at her lowest point and destroyed her entire sense of self just to save her, to save Clown Muffle, and at the end Clown Muffle decided she no longer needed her and severed the tie. Malicious? Intentional manipulation? Or a beast with an instinctual bent to preserve its own life? A force of nature, a cycle of the universe, something undeniable and unalterable, on a constant loop of replenishment as long as it had the material vegetable, mineral, or animal to digest within its tides. Gatineau might not understand. But the witch understood perfectly.
She tricked you, she said. She lured you with her vulnerability.
The smoke slithered in a shroud.
You thought you had control. Her strength surprised you. Only one thing,
said Gatineau.
She spoke only one thing. At the end of the day, after she had been everything I wanted, everything I craved, the spirit I desired, the finest I had ever possessed, far excelling my human collection, in the moment I was most madly in love with her, she said, oh. She said, funny. It doesn't even matter to me anymore.
It made sense now. It came together. Epiphany. The cat wasn't the one who wanted to crush this world. Nor the Empire, or whoever donned the mask of President DuPage. Clown Muffle, she had found a conduit into the souls of every living human on this planet, she had found endless veins into which she could leach, so she sucked the world dry like a citrus fruit, like the frozen orange she kicked into the witch's face in that grove the night Hammett died. The cat belonged to Schrödinger, after all. Schrödinger decided whether it lived or died, whether it spoke or remained silent. Clown Muffle. Gatineau tossed her head against the cruciform and laughed. Her cigarette flew out of her mouth and the ceiling swallowed it. She laughed and laughed and laughed. She laughed and sobbed. She sobbed and sobbed and sobbed.
I neglected them, I let them wither, my friends, my lovers, I could only think of her, of that idiot. And so I have lost everything, and she has gained it all.
And she laughed and sobbed and laughed.
This is my final statement. Regard it. Regard. Feel ye, look at my final expression. Know that although she took everything from me, she could not take what waited at the bottom of my Pandora's box self, that still a dreg of art remained, the art of my soul. I sacrifice what remains of me. I sacrifice it for this art, this pharaoh's tomb. Regard it. Etch it into your memory, a lesson solely for you, fille, my fille.
The witch regarded it. She stood among its tactless melodrama for what felt a long time. A token of respect to one who suffered as she had. Then she went home and the tomb sealed behind her. At home the lights had yet again extinguished. She let herself into a square of almost total blackness slotted inside a city of almost total blackness. No hum, no dogs or other creatures barked. A single, distant, interior rush of water. An exhalation of breath. The light at the end of a cigarette flared the face of the Baroness orange. She sat cross-legged on the sofa, bathrobe loose around her shoulders, the Nazi bundled and curled and sleeping beside her.
I believe, when I used our shower, I cracked a pipe somewhere.
The Baroness said, and fell silent to allow the distant rush of water to speak instead.
KSSSSSSSSSSSH,
said the water.
You calmed her down. The usual way,
said the Baroness.
Considerate of you to give us our privacy. Gatineau's past the point of return. Oh, you saw her. She's transmuted her soul to art. MMHN Sex, I guess, couldn't keep her alive forever. MN.
The Baroness's face faded. A rice grain of ember flitted to the floor and became the blackness. The Nazi twisted in her sleep and whimpered. The Baroness ran fingers through her hair until she fell quiet.
Different strokes, for different blokes.
The Baroness suppressed a chuckle.
You've seemed stressed yourself, Mon Amy. My power is, of course, to heal, body and mind. You know as well as me that it'd explode once she found out. Not interested anyway. Save Ray, save Ray.
The cigarette danced in the dark, a firefly.
I'm sorry. Irresponsible of me, I must be an adult now, at 15. Alas, in ages past, they expected even more of us women even younger, should I complain?
Her face flared orange. It faded.
KSSSSSSSSSSH,
said the water.
KEH,
said the Nazi.
Chapter. I know you never watch the show,
said the witch,
but do you know the girl? Not the cat, the one who Schrödinger, ways. So you've seen it? Non, I only read about it online, I must know what it is to protect her from it. Then do you know that she's your friend? The paste-faced one? Indeed, I knew it immediately. Yeah.
The witch had never moved far from the doorway. She watched the Baroness at the distance of a portrait.
Clown Muffle. That's the name she gave herself. I think you won't react well to what I'm going to say next. One way or another. I considered not telling you. But I think you have a right to know.
The flame flickered. The Baroness stared nowhere, her eyes had been blank the whole time, a subterranean creature evolved to blindness.
I intend to leave. I imagined you would, you are a uniquely unfettered person. That you've stayed with us so long has quite frankly surprised me. You could go anywhere. Do you think they have wraiths in Nunavut? There are islands, in the Atlantic, thousands of miles from the next inhabited locale, you and you alone could reach them. Could you carve for yourself a life even in this hell? I wonder. I intend to destroy Clown Muffle.
The blankness erased. The Baroness stared at her, the her she could not see, but she stared nonetheless.
Your friend. Whatever she once was to me, what she is now is killing this world. Even if it wasn't the best world, even if tearing it down might be what I want just as much as her. I have a responsibility not to let her do that. And a responsibility to an even older friend. MN.
The Baroness nodded.
They say she is inhumanly strong, perhaps the strongest one of our kind in existence. Internet rumors. But she is strong, stronger than me. I don't plan to fight her that way, though. I've seen her when she was vulnerable. She's seen me when I was vulnerable. She took something from me then. Maybe I can take something from her in turn. Metaphysical, abstract, I doubt, in this world, things turn in such ways.
She was probably right. Assuredly right. The witch knew her own explanation was bullshit. Straight bullshit. Clown Muffle had knocked the block tower that was Isabel Leyva to the ground, the wobbling inchoate form of an identity she had attempted to build for herself, that Hemet helped her build. If she bashed her brain against the glittering diamond that was Clown Muffle, bashed until her head caved in like the hanging corpses in Gatineau's pantry, then at least she would have built a little block tower for herself before the end.
I've made my decision. I cannot keep you either way, truthfully, I'm drained enough managing my little friend, soon I fear I will have to devote my entire self to her, fear or perhaps pray. If I succeed I'll save you both. For your generosity and charity, that's reason enough to fight. If you succeed. If. Yes.
The Nazi twisted. The water rushed. The darkness gleamed and the cigarette's light dulled. The Baroness contracted to a mouth and thin, unglossed lips.
My petite Amy will not be so gracious about your sudden departure, no, not at all. Good. Let her turn me into the enemy. If she's mad at me, she won't be mad at you. If she hates me, she has a reason to hope. Like how she hates that cat. Exactly the same.
The water ceased running. It may have run out, the utility may have died. Its sound became a quiet, steady drip.
Thank you for taking me in,
said the witch.
You're a kind person.
The cigarette snubbed against an ashtray and the darkness completed itself.
Farewell, Isabel. Au revoir, Paula.
A second of silence, blackness, emptiness, nothingness, then the Baroness giggled.
I have never heard more abominable French, not revoir, revoir.
But by then the witch had already slipped out the way she came and departed. End of chapter. Chapter end.